Did you know that the national debt of the United States has spiked up to a staggering $34 trillion? That was as of January 8, 2024. You might be under the impression that this is far-fetched, but through deep research, we found how profound this upcoming danger is. This huge number points towards a financial burden which will halt the destiny of the nation and bring down generational legacies. Today, I'll be taking you towards Ray Dalio's observations on this impending downfall, who is an expert on financial issues that has been sounding the alarm for over 3 years. This whole issue will be a serious threat to the whole economy, ranging from stocks to real estate. When we look through Dalio's prism of warnings, fun fact is that the root to this problem dates back to the early 80s, and it's only showing symptoms now. So you see how severe the problem is. First, we need to dive into a bit of history to understand this situation better. Debt has always been a part of the U.S. economy, and because of this, people have drawn to be more familiar with it. This mindset makes you believe it's nothing harmful. Let me tell you about the key takeaway in this issue instead of diving deep into its history. Naturally, you might be thinking, why worry now after all this time? Which is a fair point since we've always floated ashore through stormy seas. This is where death spirals come in. These have successfully brought down some of history's most known and prosperous empires. The path we're headed right now is not so different after all. The reason why these signs are not far-fetched is mainly because debt expands with time. With such growth in debt, the nation will eventually arrive at a point where debt becomes too large of a number. What I mean is that borrowing money in good times is easy, but once the going gets tough, the burden becomes harder to pay. The amount of money spent on interest expense alone in the U.S. right now is $169 billion per year. Believe it or not, in 4 years, the government is estimated to spend double the amount of money spent on the entire military, solely on interest. You can see that this path is clearly unstable and risky to the whole economic system. To understand better, listen to Dalio speak about the specifics and how dangerous the situation is.
In my opinion, we are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis when the supply-demand gap, when you're producing too much debt and you have also a shortage of buyers. What's happening now as we have to sell all this debt is we then do have enough buyers. There are changes now in terms of the quantities in the world that are being held by large investors around the world that have lost money in these treasury bonds and so on. And then there are geopolitical changes which are having an effect. Some cases, some countries are worried about sanctions, and then there's this geopolitical shift. So when I look at the supply-demand issue, there's a supply-demand issue for that debt. There's a lot of debt. It has to be bought, has to have a high enough interest rate. So a crisis, that's, if we continue down this path in terms of what's likely over the next. And so when we look at the buyers, there appears to be a significant shortage of the buyers for that government debt. But we're now at the brink of being able to see what that supply-demand picture looks like as we go over the next year and two.
You just heard Dalio explain that the government sells its debts. I know you're wondering what this means. This process is simple. When the government lacks funding that covers expenses like infrastructure project or public programs, the government turns to financial markets to borrow money. A mechanism called Treasury securities is used for this whole process. What this means is that individuals to large corporations or even foreign governments can purchase these securities. By purchasing, they are lending money to the government with the promise of the government paying back a certain amount of money with interest during a specific period of time. The government issues different types such as treasury bills, notes, and bonds, each with varying maturity dates. However, in return, the buyers earn interest on their investment. This is basically how the government raises capital that will allow them to operate without depending solely on taxation. What Dalio sees in the current situation is a growth in low demand for U.S. debt instruments. This means that fewer people are willing to lend money to the government, and you can see why this is a serious issue. The U.S. government will most likely face a few challenges if this situation continues. One thing is that the government will be forced to offer higher interest rates to attract lenders. Secondly, with the demand dropping, it will significantly be harder for the government to raise the money it needs. The situation is the same as you wanting a loan, and fewer banks are willing to lend you money. What happens now when the federal government deficit grows is the government is forced to issue more debt instruments in the hopes of bridging the gap between taxes that are collected and the annual spending. The recent trend of a decreasing demand for debt instruments was noted by Ray Dalio, and this can easily trigger some serious consequences. As I mentioned before, it forces the rise in interest rates of these debt instruments. Keep in mind that we're already allocating a fair portion of funds to cover interest expenses. Increasing this further would push the economy off of the cliff and cause a ripple effect. The harder you push, the harder the economy halts, eventually leading to a recession. The connection between a soaring federal deficit, declining demand for debt instruments, and the necessity to raise interest rates on these instruments can create fragile economic balance. Maintaining this balance is key to prevent serious backlash on the economy. If we go down this oath, all you will face are challenges and worsened financial conditions. Listen to Dalio's explanation.
The things that you see happen over and over again when you look at history is when you have a financial not good situation. At the same time as you have large wealth gaps, you start to see the emergence of populism, and we see extremism in both of the political parties. Okay, we see that split. A populist is an individual or a leader or a political person who will win at all costs, that the rules of the game don't as much matter. And so we're in the January 6th type of incident and so on is very interesting. The political system in terms of primaries and the parties tends to create that sort of polarity. I think that I think it's very clear that there is only one good outcome, if we can, and that's a strong bipartisan middle, because either of the extremes is not going to be able to be dominant. The small right, or even the small left, and as a result, we're seeing a fragmentation. Geographically, you're seeing people move to different areas, not just because of taxes, but of differences in values and so on. And so you're seeing this separation. I think over the next 2 years, the real question is, can we have a strong bipartisan middle, or are we going to have that kind of fragmentation? We have three things aligning that are concerning. On this short-term debt cycle, I call it, the 7-year cycle, we're about halfway through. In other words, interest rates are now at a level that they're probably going to stay at, but they're probably not going to rise much from here, and there's tightness. And the consequences of that are going to be a weaker economy going forward. It doesn't have to be a big downturn because of the household sector, but it is a balance sheet kind of recession. And I think things are going to get worse in the economy. There's a financial issue at the same time as you have this internal conflict. So I think that that's going to make for a risky situation.
Although it sounded pretty bad, there's still hope for us. History reassures that the present trajectory with U.S. debt will not entirely ruin the nation. Think of the post-Civil War period, where national debt increased by an astonishing 40 times. During this time, the global presence of the United States was less organized and insignificant. Even so, we were able to maintain stability through various measures like bond sales, prudent fiscal policies, and the commitment to redeeming currency and economic growth. The present situation is more prominent than it was back then in the global economy. Even if debt rises through the roof, the situation can be managed through careful financial planning and strategizing, with measures like bond issuance and responsible fiscal policies that can help prevent hyperinflation. Moreover, the U.S. possesses quite the advantage with its global reserve currency and military superpower. If this issue is navigated properly with these strengths and resilience, hyperinflation could be neutralized. We all know that the United States holds a unique place in international trading with the widespread use of the U.S. dollar. This high demand allows the U.S. to import more than it exports, all along without depreciating the currency. With this added advantage, the U.S. can supply an increased amount of dollars for fundings like social programs, defense spending, covering interest expenses, and even providing bailouts to banks. Even so, still, the U.S. dollar will not depreciate. According to a 2022 survey by the Bank for International Settlements, the U.S. dollar is involved in approximately 88% of global foreign exchange transactions, which has remained stable for the past 2 decades. With this data, it shows how the U.S. can be flexible in managing budget deficit. Even in challenging situations, there's a considerable buffer, as many countries would be affected before the U.S. faces severe consequences. I'm pretty sure that statement raises ethical questions. However, it is a reflection of how the U.S. government would rather have the rest of the world bear the burden of economic challenges before reaching a point of hyperinflation. There are points to Dalio's argument, but also certain people might think it's too far away to worry. Regardless, the bottom line is, some sort of reform is needed to contain this spending that has spiraled out of control. It also makes me think that a recession is what is needed to change this stagnant mindset of the lawmakers that would hopefully change the direction of the nation. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.